Commodus was born in the year 161 AD, the son of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king who embodied wisdom, duty, and restraint. Rome saw in Marcus Aurelius the last of the good emperors, a ruler who sought to govern not by cruelty or spectacle, but through reason and Stoic discipline. His reign symbolized balance, a fragile order that held together a vast and restless empire. But from the very beginning, Commodus was different. He was not molded by the hardships of war or the discipline of philosophy, but by luxury. While Marcus spent years on distant frontiers, leading armies against Germanic tribes in bitter cold and endless campaigns, Commodus grew up in palaces, surrounded by courtiers who whispered flattery into his ears. As a boy, he was showered with titles that made him seem destined for greatness. At only 5 years old, Commodus was named Caesar, the chosen heir. At 16, he became co-emperor, the youngest in Roman history. Statues were raised in his honor, coins struck with his image, and the Senate proclaimed him the future of Rome. Yet, Marcus Aurelius saw in his son what others refused to admit: weakness. The boy lacked discipline, patience, and the moral weight of leadership. He preferred gains over philosophy, comfort over hardship. In private, the philosopher king must have wondered if the empire he had preserved through sacrifice would survive in the hands of his heir. When Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD, the golden age of Rome seemed to die with him. Commodus inherited not only the throne, but also the impossible legacy of a father revered as a living sage. Rome expected another philosopher emperor. Instead, it received a boy who longed not for wisdom, but for spectacle. From that moment, a shadow fell across the empire. For the first time in nearly a century, Rome's ruler was not chosen for virtue, nor adopted for merit, but born by blood, and blood would come to define his reign. Once seated on the throne, Commodus began to reshape the image of what it meant to be emperor. He had no desire to continue his father's wars on the northern frontiers. Peace treaties were signed not out of strength, but out of convenience, as Commodus rushed back to Rome, not to govern, but to indulge. For the young emperor, power was not about duty. It was a stage, a theater, a place where all of Rome would be forced to watch him play the leading role. His greatest obsession was not politics, but the arena, the Colosseum, once a place where slaves and criminals fought to the death for the entertainment of the people, became the emperor's playground. Commodus did not sit among the senators to watch the games. He descended into the sand as a gladiator. Clad in armor, carrying sword and trident, he declared himself the living embodiment of Hercules, the son of Jupiter, the conqueror of beasts and men alike. But the contests were a lie. No gladiator dared to harm the emperor. His opponents were carefully chosen cripples, wounded men, even tethered animals. Commodus slaughtered them with theatrical gestures, basking in the forced applause of the crowd. Ancient sources claim he killed hundreds of wild beasts himself, shooting lions, panthers, and even giraffes with arrows, always to the roaring approval of sycophants who dared not look away. Each appearance in the arena was announced as a divine performance. Statues were erected depicting him with Hercules' club and lion skin. He renamed the months of the year after his own titles. Rome itself, he declared, would no longer be the city of Romulus, but the city of Commodus. The Senate trembled. For the aristocracy, an emperor in the arena was unthinkable, a humiliation that degraded the dignity of Rome itself. Yet none dared confront him. To oppose Commodus was to invite death. To flatter him was to survive, and so the empire watched, helpless, as its ruler descended further into spectacle and vanity, confusing tyranny with theater, cruelty with entertainment. Rome had crowned a gladiator, and the Colosseum had become the throne of the world. As the years passed, the emperor's thirst for spectacle deepened, but so too did his paranoia. Commodus began to see enemies everywhere, within the Senate, among the generals, even inside his own household. Anyone who questioned his actions or even failed to cheer loudly enough at his games, risk-death executions became common. Senators were stripped of wealth and titles, accused of conspiracies that may never have existed. Families that had served Rome for generations were wiped out with a single word from the emperor's lips. The Senate chamber, once the heart of Roman governance, was reduced to a place of fear, where trembling voices offered praise to avoid suspicion. Commodus' cruelty was not limited to politics. He extended his gladiatorial fantasies into daily life. He would summon citizens at random to fight him in mock battles, always ensuring his safety while humiliating others. He forced Rome's elite to dress as slaves or gladiators, mocking the very hierarchy on which the empire stood. The emperor's obsession with his own godlike image grew uncontrollable. He renamed Rome itself as Colonia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus. He minted coins with his face as Hercules, and even had the head of the Colossus of Nero replaced with his own likeness. To him, he was not just an emperor, but the living god of Rome. But his tyranny had consequences. Beneath the forced applause and groveling loyalty, hatred festered. Senators whispered in secret, generals plotted in silence. Rome's patience was wearing thin. The empire had endured corrupt rulers before, but never one who so openly mocked its dignity. For Commodus, the line between emperor and performer, ruler and tyrant, had vanished. His reign had become a nightmare of vanity, cruelty, and fear, and yet he believed himself adored. By the year 192 AD, Rome could no longer bear the weight of Commodus' madness. The Senate despised him, the people feared him, and even those closest to him began to plot his downfall. The breaking point came when Commodus announced his plan for the new year. On January 1st, 193 AD, he intended to appear before the Roman people not as their emperor, but as a gladiator. He would lead the ceremonies dressed in full armor, wielding weapons, and forcing Rome to bow to him as both ruler and performer. To the Senate and Rome's elite, this was the ultimate humiliation. The empire reduced to a circus under the hand of a madman. Those who still held influence, his mistress Marcia, the chamberlain Eclectus, and the praetorian prefect Letus, realized Commodus had to die. They feared for their own lives, but more than that, they feared for Rome itself. Together, they hatched a plot. On December 31st, 192 AD, Marcia offered Commodus a cup of poisoned wine. He drank, and soon after, his body weakened. But the poison did not kill him fast enough. As he struggled in his chambers, gasping for breath, a wrestler named Narcissus, once his trainer, was sent in. He wrapped his arms around the emperor's throat and strangled him to death. Thus ended the reign of Commodus, the self-proclaimed Hercules, the Gladiator Emperor. At only 31 years old, his life was extinguished not on the battlefield, nor in the arena, but in the silence of a private bathhouse. When the Senate learned of his death, they rejoiced. Statues of Commodus were torn down, his name cursed, his memory officially condemned under the Roman practice of damnatio memoria. Rome sought to erase him from history, and yet Commodus was never forgotten. His reign became a warning of what happens when absolute power falls into the hands of vanity and delusion. He was not remembered as a soldier, nor as a statesman, but as an emperor who fancied himself a gladiator and nearly brought Rome to its knees. The death of Commodus did not bring Rome peace. Instead, it plunged the empire into chaos. His assassination marked the end of the Antonine dynasty, and what followed was the infamous Year of the Five Emperors, a time of civil war, betrayal, and shifting rulers. But Commodus himself became more than just a name in a timeline. He became a symbol to the Senate and historians of Rome. He was a monster, the emperor who abandoned his duties, who humiliated the empire by dressing as a gladiator, and who squandered the golden age built by his father, Marcus Aurelius. Ancient writers painted him as a tyrant unworthy of the purple, a man driven by vanity and bloodlust, and yet the story is more complex. Some accounts suggest that Commodus was loved by certain groups of the people, especially the lower classes who enjoyed the games and festivals he provided. He reduced taxes, showered the city with entertainments, and presented himself as one of them, a ruler who fought not in distant wars, but in the arena where all could watch still. History is rarely kind to rulers who abandon duty for spectacle. Commodus' reign came to define the beginning of Rome's long decline. Where Marcus Aurelius embodied wisdom and philosophy, Commodus embodied excess and delusion. His obsession with being a gladiator revealed the fragility of Rome's leadership, how one man's madness could destabilize an empire built over centuries. In the centuries that followed, Commodus was remembered less as a statesman and more as a cautionary tale. He was immortalized in stories, plays, and even modern films as the mad emperor who fought in the arena while Rome crumbled around him. Life asks us a question that echoes across time. What happens when those with the greatest power seek only their own pleasure rather than the good of the people they rule? For Rome, the answer was Commodus, and his name still stands as a reminder of how spectacle, ego, and unchecked ambition can corrode even the mightiest of empires.